Hello everybody and welcome to my tutorial. Today I'm going to be talking about how to create realistic looking vegetation inside of Cinema 4D and Octane render. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to create realistic looking vegetation with image files, flat 2D image files, and use that inside of Cinema 4D and Octane to create realistic looking plants. Now the image files we're going to be using today are going to be supplied through Quixel Megascans. And the actual look we're going for is this one right here, like I did my daily render right here. This is daily 324, and we are not going to be making the trees, the grass, or the floor. We're going to be making these ferns right here. So this is what we're going to be making. This is what we want to keep our eye on. And I'm going to show you how to create this kind of realistic looking vegetation look inside of Cinema 4D and Octane render. Now here is a little bit more info on kind of how this is done. We take this flat 2D image sets here. They have a ton of them that they launched in their Mega Update 4. And here is the flat 2D images that we're going to be working with, similar to this, and different types like these. They have many, many different types of image files, but stuff similar to this, and that is what we're going to be using to make these realistic looking plants and leaves and vegetation and such. So to begin, what we need to do is head over to quexel.com, and we need to click on this little spot here, Quixel Megascans. We're going to click on Out Now. So this is the one that we want to head to right there. And then what we want to click on is free. We're just going to select this up here. And then in here, now we have a large variety, or not super big, but a decent amount of free little 2D image files of plant types that we could use. Free 3D scan plants that they got. Now, they're not actually 3D. They call them 3D scans, but they are actually just image files. And the one we are going to be using is these fern ones right here, not this one or this one. I recommend for your projects that you do use as many different types as you can that are native to that environment that you're making. Like if you're making a rainforest, use all types of native plants to that area. Don't put in like a sunflower in your rainforest if that doesn't exist there. If you want to go for photorealism, but keep a lot of variety in your plants because as you can see here, I use some grass, bushes, and intertwine the grass with the ferns to make it a little bit more real. So I actually use this grass up here with these ferns. So I do recommend that. For the sake of this tutorial, though, we are just going to be using these ferns right here. I'm going to select that, and on the right we have a series of options. What we have first is our resolution. This is how high of a resolution we can use. I'm going to be using 4K. I'm going to have my context set to offline. So real time means for games, and offline means for film and for video. Since that's what we're going to be using, we'll set this to offline. And Octane uses a specular workflow, so we're going to use that instead of metalness. And our microsurface is going to be roughness, not gloss, because Octane uses a roughness map. Next, we have all our different texture maps that are going to be supplied inside of, or downloaded, I should say, from Quixel Megascans, and we want all of them. So let's just check on Toggle All. Now that we have that done, all we have to do is click Download, and it will start that download for us, and it'll begin the download process. This happens really quick depending on your internet speed, and we have that with us already. Just in case that took a long time, I actually had a backup saved right here. But since the new one downloads so quick, we're just going to left click it, right click it, and then click Extract All and click Extract. Now, let's open up this folder and take a look what we have inside. All these maps are what we're going to use to make up our realistic looking vegetation. Now that we have this done, we're about ready to hop inside of Cinema 4D. Or we're not about, we are ready. So let's go ahead and let's hop right in. I'm going to select Cinema 4D. I have it up and running here. And to begin, what we need to do is we need to put our leaves or our vegetation on something. So to do this, we're going to go up here to our objects. We're going to select a plane right here. This is what we're going to be putting it on. And once we have our plane set up, what we're going to do is we are going to start importing in our textures to place on it. Now for me, I find it much easier to use Cinema 4D materials in the beginning, even though we are making this for Octane, and then converting it later down the road. This is because it's nicer to actually see the alpha and actually live view of the plants inside Cinema 4D's interface, the actual leaves themselves, the actual alpha for the leaves while we're working on them, and then convert it later to Octane, because if we use Octane materials, we couldn't actually see live transparency in the viewport. We would have to actually render. So you could render in the viewport with Octane on the right while you're editing on the left, but that just shrinks your screen and makes it a little harder. So for me, I find this easier, but definitely go about that however way you'd like. For me, though, I do prefer the Cinema 4D way, so that is what I'm going to be showing in this tutorial here. So all we're going to do is just double-click, make a Cinema 4D material, open it up, go to Color, open up our File Explorer, drag the color channel, our albedo, into the color channel right here. We're going to click No to this because we don't want to save that path location. And here we go. We need to, of course, apply the material to our plane, and there we go. We have that. And I'm having all this popped up because I'm already in texture mode. I'm going to go to model mode and turn off my enable axis. So this is what it's going to be like for you guys. This is what you're going to have right off the bat. And now let's select alpha in our material and turn it on. Go back to our File Explorer and drag in the opacity map to the texture, and I'm going to select no for that path location. And now, this is why I'm using a Cinema 4D material, is because we can actually see the alpha for all the leaves right through the plane, which makes it really nice to work with. What we do need to do, though, is to fix this blurriness. Let's go to Editor and change our texture preview size from default to no scaling. Now we're not having any scaling. It's a true 4K texture coming right through. Final thing I want to do is see the specular kind of highlight going through here. We're going to take our reflectance and uncheck it. Now we don't have that kind of reflection going through and kind of ruining that view for us. Now that we have this all set, I'm going to close this material, and we need to start cropping out each individual leaf and start separating it. So to do this, I'm going to copy this plane, so we always have our backup to come to, and this new one right here is going to be our latest one that we're going to start with. Now, before we start making this plane editable and cropping these out, it's very important that we take our projection mode for our texture and change it from projection UV mapping to flat. We want to have a flat projection. And I'm actually going to delete my old plane because we need to get this material set up first. What we're going to do is we're going to select the material, set our projection to flat like we did, so we want to make sure this is flat. Next, we go to our material texture mode, so we're going to select texture mode, turn on your enable axis mode, because if we press R and try and rotate our texture now, it can get a little wonky if we're like say in scale or something. It kind of unevens it. You don't have to do it in texture mode, but out of habit, I recommend you do it in texture mode. I'm going to undo so I get a perfect centered it back to what it was. Go to our texture mode, press R, and rotate on the red axis, holding down left shift to constrain that to a perfect 90. And there you go. Now we have it projecting nicely on our plane. Now we're going to press T, and this is good that we're in axis mode, because if we were trying to scale without it, it wouldn't be uniform. And we're just going to scale this up just till it's touching the edges. It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's actually go middle mouse click, and then the top view, middle mouse click again to see the top view, and scale this up just till it is about to touch the edge. Something about here. Doesn't have to be perfect, not all the way. But now that we have that, we have it about set up and ready to go. So let's head back to object mode, unenable our axis, and now let's middle mouse click back to our perspective view, middle mouse click again, and let's copy our plane up here, and now we'll have this one back here is our copy main. So we'll always have this guy to go to, and we'll take him and hide him, and now let's select our latest plane right up here. And what we need to do, the biggest thing, is let's do the shortcut N plus B, and this will kind of show us our shading. And I do want to point out, this is something I completely missed. If you are in top mode right now and we're wondering how I have my textures on, because you might have gotten to here, and when I was showing this, you might have been like, oh, I don't see textures. What you're probably seeing is this. You're not going to see your leaves, so you're not going to know, oh, how do I change my texture projection? All you have to do is do the shortcut N plus B, and that'll turn your textures on here in this viewport, and we could see that when we were scaling. But now that we have that set up, we're going to go to our perspective, and we need to take the subdivision on our plane down to something like a 1 by 1. I prefer that. And now once we have this done, we are ready to select our plane and press C to make it editable. Now, we can start moving these points in many different ways. My favorite way of doing it, though, is just simply middle mouse clicking, going to the top view and then selecting point mode. And now we can literally move the points on our plane. I'm going to press E, and watch what's happening. We're able to move the plane without affecting any of the leaves that we have here. Isn't this crazy? We can actually live edit and crop these leaves out. If we had our plane projection instead of flat to UV mapping, we would be moving the UVs. We'd be stretching our leaves, not doing what we want. So that's why we want to be in flat mode. That's why we set that up. So it's a very big thing, I find, to set that like that. Now that we've done that, though, we'll just select that point, pull this over here, and we first also want to identify what leaf we want to go for. So out of all these leaves, I'd like to get this big one done first. So we're just going to go over, crop him out, select this point, go up here, we got him, and we're going to select you, and we're going to grab him, and just kind of get a basic shape going here. Nothing too crazy. We want to make sure we're not cropping him out. We can zoom in, and this is just where you spend the time getting this kind of set up. So nothing too in depth. And we may need to apply a cut here. So we're going to do KL to make a loop cut. So that's a shortcut, K plus L. And then we're going to click like right here, and that'll apply our loop cut. And then what we just do is we can press E, go back to our move mode, and grab this point, and we'll pull it here, and this point, and move it there. So this way we can have a little bit as close as possible. It doesn't really matter how close they are, but for the sake of ease of use, I like to make them as close as possible. Nothing too crazy, just so later on when we're bending them and moving them, it's a little bit more user-friendly. And we may subdivide these more later on, but for now, the less polys we have on each fern, the better. So if I can make it so this is only 2 polys, that is perfect. Now that we have that done, we'll call this leaf 1. So now we have fern leaf 1, and we're going to while holding down Alt, double click these dots to hide it, and let's bring back our main. And while I'm thinking about it, let's select our main and make sure we hit set its main subdivision down to 1 and 1, so each time we copy it, we don't have to worry about that. So let's copy our main up here and hide our old one. And now we have a new leaf to start working off of. Same principles. We're going to press C, bring this up again, identify the next leaf. Let's get this little smaller one next to them. Select these points, pull them over. And I just find this super intuitive and easy to work with because we're getting live alpha and live texture preview of our ferns like right in real time as we're working on it. And yes, it's not as realistic looking as if we did it with the Octane material in the live viewer, but we don't have to have it realistic. This is just technically getting the entire fern leaf on a single plane right here. And so here we're going to have to make a cut. So we'll do KL. Select our cut, press E to move tool, and select that point, pull it over, and now we're getting him in proper shape-ish, close to what we need. Select this point, and at this point, this is basically the process. Now, I'm going to go through and crop out a few more leaves and then move on to the next step, but I encourage you to go through and do many, many more leaves. Do every leaf that's on this entire plane. So let's call this leaf 2. You guys get the idea of the system right now. Copy our new copy up there, and whoops, I copied that one too. I found that since I have this one selected and then I hold down left control and grab him, I actually end up copying both of them. So I want to select the guy I want to copy, then hold down left control and drag. Now we have just him. So we'll hide our old leaf, unhide the new set of leaves, and we'll do press C again on our plane and identify one more leaf. We're only going to do 3. I encourage you to crop out each individual shape. For the best ones I cropped out here, here, here. These are like 3 different ones up here, plus this one here is like 4. It's a lot of work, but I encourage you to do this and build up a library of these pre-cropped out leaves. It gives you a lot of options. But let's do one more fern, and let's get this guy. He's kind of more, he's a little damaged, a little bit of realism's out in here, a little bit more detail. So select that, grab our points, and start positioning them on the fern. And this is pretty basic at this point, just getting this done. But then later on, I promise I'm going to show you guys how to get some extra realism out of this through a lot of really interesting techniques that you can use. Pull this about to here. We are going to have to make a middle crop, so we get the base and the top. Again, shortcut K plus L. Middle mouse click, make that cut, press E. Grab these points, pull them over, grab this point, pull it over and down, because we're coming in on this extra leaf and we don't want him here. So we're going to pull him here, but we're cropping out down here, so I got to pull down and then go over. There we go. This one may actually require another cut. So let's just take this whole point here. Let's keep them even so it's a relatively straight-ish line. And I don't think we're coming anywhere else. We're going to need another cut on this guy. So let's grab him, pull him over, KL right here, E, and pull this over so we're not interfering with that. That should be good. And maybe pull him down and in. And we don't have to be too particular on this. This is good enough for now. And we'll call this one, double click, leaf 3. Press enter, we got it. Now we're coming up to the third and final step. I'm going to middle mouse click and middle mouse click on here. Or, I'm sorry, this isn't the final step, but this is one of the most important steps that I really recommend. Now that we have the basic crop done for our leaves and we're happy with this, I implore you to spend time, get the points at a nice spot, make sure you're happy with the polygon positioning on these. Like maybe this point could be a little bit more even here. Like just spend some time getting this right. I'm not, because this is a tutorial and I want to keep it relatively short, but and make sure you're not cropping the bottom of the leaf down here. Select both those points, pull back a little bit. There we go. Just make sure it's decently nice. And once we have all these done, what we're going to do is we're going to take the UV tags for all these and delete them. And notice we're not having a problem because we're using a projection mode. We're not using UV mapping. We're using a flat projection. What we're going to do now, and this is really crazy, is I'm going to unhide all my other leaves. And here we go. We can see they're laid out on that. Imagine that plane was there. We cropped each one out. We're going to select each material. I think we can do this in bulk. I might be wrong. But what we can do is after we select them, we're going to right-click, and we're going to do Generate UVW Coordinates. And if I do that, yes, we can do it in bulk. Now I have assigned a UV map for each leaf's material. By doing this, I can hold down left shift, double click the UV map, and we have our polygons and the UVs laid out correctly. So imagine this square here was this texture. Imagine this texture right here, right, is in place of where that square is. So now our UV polygons, these are the polys for that leaf, leaf 1, are laid out perfectly cropping out, so they're only receiving the texture from that spot. What does this mean, though? This means if we click on our leaf and we grab a point, we're still in point edit mode, and I move, I'm actually going to start deforming the leaf. We're now no longer freely moving those polygons. Now that we have the crop out, we can actually start moving and deforming the leaf to create different variations in our plant. This is pretty crazy, and this is an interesting ability. Now there's some more features to this that we're actually going to bump into later on, so I'm not going to talk about that yet, but later on you're going to find there's another huge benefit to having generated UVW coordinates for this, and now not using the flat projection. We are actually using UV mapping now because we generated that. So you'll find out later on when I mention that. But moving on, now that we have these three guys set up, we need to start positioning them in our main kind of leaf shape. So the first thing we need to do is go back to model mode, and we need to get the base of each leaf correctly set up. So we're going to go middle mouse click in the top mode, and by set up their base, I mean we're going to select leaf 1, we're going to go to the enable axis mode, and we're going to pull this to the base of the leaf. So we want their axis at the very middle of the leaf. Now see how it's not snapping or anything? I would like to kind of to snap right there. I'm going to use the shortcut Shift plus Q, and that's going to turn on snapping for me. I'm very sorry, Shift plus Q is not snapping. Shift plus Q actually turns on enable quantization. So you quantize, however you pronounce that word. We don't want to do that. That's actually a very cool thing to use, though. Shift plus Q again, turn that off. Snapping was Shift S. Yeah, that would make sense. Shift S is for snapping. And we can only snap to points. So apparently we can't snap to the poly edge. We might be able to do that if I do edge snap. Yes, we can edge snap. That's super handy. So now that we have edge snap on, we have to go to right in here and make sure we do have edge snap turned on. So edge snap is on. And we're going to snap to that edge right there and put it about at the base, as close as we can. That's good for this plant. Let's go to leaf 2, do edge snap right about there, base of the leaf. You want to put it where it makes sense where the stem would be on the bottom of that poly, right about there. We got that one, and now we can go ahead and turn this off by pressing the shortcut key L on our keyboard to disable that. Middle mouse click back to perspective, and now we are set up to start to position our leaves. So to begin, let's select leaf 1 and leaf 3 by holding down left shift, and we're going to do Alt plus G, and we're going to place them in a null. And let's just call this whole null Fern 1. So now we have our Fern 1. Let's open this up, select all our leaves, do it again, shift click, and we're going to go to coordinates, and this is a really big quick tip. Instead of zeroing these out by typing in 0 in each one of these boxes, see these two little arrows right here, the up and down? If we right click on them, it'll reset them to their default 0 location. Now, it won't always do 0. If you start a parameter that defaults to 50, for an example, and you change that to say like 62, when you right click, it would actually change that parameter to 50. So whatever its startup default is, that's what it'll set it to. It's pretty handy. So we'll just right click here and right click there. We zeroed these out. Now we can begin positioning these like a fern kind of would. So select this leaf, press R, and we're not going to just grab a point. We're not going to do this linear kind of like this. We're going to do Control Z. What we're going to do is just going to grab somewhere in this empty circle, and see how we still have snapping. Let's go ahead and do Shift plus S, turn that off, and we're just going to grab somewhere in this circle and do a very organic turn, because it doesn't have to be perfect, because plants aren't perfect. We want like really big variation. So that's leaf 1. Let's grab leaf 2, go ahead, pull this up, and then we got leaf 3, and we'll just spin him any other random direction and pull him up. Now you're going to have way more than 3 leaves here. You should have like 5 or 6, maybe 8 or 10 even for your finished plant, because you went and cropped out all those extra leaves. But for this tutorial, we are only going to have 3 base leaves to kind of work with. Now that we have this, let's go ahead, we can work from these here. I actually encourage you, because these are unchanged leaves, they're nice and straight, so I recommend keeping them. So I'm going to copy these up, and we'll call these Fern 1, and this one will be Fern1 underscore base copy. So we have our base copy, always go back to, we'll hide those, always keep a nice backup of all your stuff. And now we're going to Fern 1, and we're going to open these up, select leaf 1, and now let's begin editing it and really just try getting some good shapes on here. Let's go to point mode. And now we're going to press spacebar to bring up our live selection tool, and we can middle mouse click to make this bigger, smaller, and let's just grab these points, and then we can grab like this little red kind of triangle there to move it. So we're just going to kind of bend them down a little bit, kind of bend that a bit there, select these points, bend this here, kind of bend it up, and we're just going to do some basic movement. Now at this point, we can always add more detail. So this is why we always have these other leaves to come to. Don't have leaves, like say we might have some straight leaves, we're not going to need to cut a polygon here if we don't want that. For us though, we do. So for this particular leaf, we are going to do KL, and we are going to do a cut. So now we have this new cut right here, and we can grab spacebar, these points right here, and we can bend these and give it a little bit more of a curve. Right here at the base, I would like a KL, do another cut, spacebar, grab these points, and give that a little bit of a bend. Now the reason I saved a backup of these old plants, see this leaf under here that does not have those cuts? If I make a leaf later on where I don't want as many subdivisions, it's so much easier to go back instead of trying to remove these points. So it's always nice to start with that clean leaf. So don't make every leaf be high poly, especially if you're designing for games. Keep it as low poly as possible. Don't have a cut where it's not needed. So now that we have that, let's hide our base fern. And this is pretty good for a first leaf. Let's grab these points, maybe pull them down, rotate. We are going to do a linear rotation here because we want to keep those straight-ish. And that's kind of good for our first leaf. Let's go ahead and hop to our leaf 2. And we're still in point mode. Grab you and you. Pull these down, rotate. And this can be, is however you'd like. That's kind of, whoops, going to undo and grab this one. Pull it down. I want this leaf a little bit more curved. And spacebar, grab these, pull them down, pull them back. And I love how we can actually stretch and deform the leaves because it's part of that geometry. It is really nice. We'll do KL, do a cut right here. Spacebar, grab these points, pull them up. KL, do a cut right here. Spacebar, grab these points, pull them up. Nice little curve to our leaf right here. Grab these front ones and pull them back and up. Yeah, that's a nice little bit. We can curve this over, take these leaves, pull this, kind of just get a nice shape going. And now I am going to kind of re-straighten him and change him. Like, this adds a lot of variation. Like, see how we're bending the stalk? Like, we're actually getting some, like, really cool variation that wasn't even there. So we're adding variation to the leaves that never even existed before, which is pretty cool. And we're going to have multiple versions of that. So the key is to realistic geometry, or sorry, vegetation, is variation. That is the name of the game. Variation and changes. That's what really adds some really nice organic looks to it. Because the big thing about organic is it does have a lot of variation involved into it. And I'm going to be sloppy, and I'm just going to kind of do this. I encourage you to be a little bit less messy than I am, but just for the sake of the tutorial of speed, we are going to go ahead and get this as quick as possible. And there we go. So we have some basic kind of leaves looking here. Now what we need to do is we need to add more of them. So let's select, say, leaf 3. We're going to go to object mode, and now I can press R and rotate, and I can hold down left control and copy this and rotate them. And now I can let go and kind of further refine this leaf. I encourage you to hand copy and rotate each leaf for the bush, because you can use pre-generated methods with random effectors and all this stuff, and it can get complicated. Why it's very interesting to do that procedurally, and I've tried it. You're never going to get anything as realistic. They're just not designed to recreate in this type of way. I really encourage you hand doing this, especially like here we got a big leaf. I really encourage for you to set it up this way. And in fact, let's undo those changes. What I also recommend is before we go through and start doing these cuts, leaf 3 is medium leaf. So let's call mid leaf, and then leaf 2 is small leaf. So we're just going to call this small leaf, and then we got big leaf. So this is our big leaf up here, big leaf. So now we can just keep track of what we have here. So let's take our small leaf, left control, copy, swing him way over here maybe, and just kind of keep fiddling that around until it gets into the right spot. Let's take our big leaf, copy him, swing him over, something about here, but I highly encourage, we can select our mid leaf. I highly encourage you to manually do this. Do not use procedural methods. It just, it doesn't work as well. Now, use procedural methods for distributing the bushes, highly recommended that, but for the simple things like just positioning the leaves and stuff here, this is a really big deal. Like, this is a big thing. This adds a lot of organicness to it. Not to mention, there's rules kind of on how leaves usually sit. We're not going to have a leaf hanging down like this, which is what you're going to get with some automatic methods a lot of times. So you want to keep your leaf kind of up here a little bit. This is a pretty poor looking fern, because you would want something much more detailed. And I will take a big one here, copy him, pull him over here. Now here's what we're going to do. It's real cool, is we can pull him up a little bit, say kind of tilted like this here. Now what we need to do is for some of these leaves, let's go back to our point mode and refine them. See how I tilted them at an angle? Let's select these points here, and we're going to pull them down. So we're going to have some kind of curvature to our leaf, some little changes. Some parts are going to be higher than lower, so I'm going to tilt this up and see how we get like a twist here, adding some variation there. Let's grab this, pull this down and back. Take this front one, kind of bow him up. Take him, curve him over, just kind of getting a weird different shape here. So now we got like this weird fern kind of sticking out. Might be a little bit more than we're looking for. We can go back to object model mode, rotate, pull him up a little bit. And this is just getting some variation. Kind of have fun with it and play around in what you want to do. I want some more small ones here, so I'm going to select this little mid leaf here. I'm going to grab him, and let's grab another one right here. Go back to point mode and press T, scale him in. Just do something really interesting looking, just like something different. Scale this guy in, grab these here, and I'm going to pull them down. And I'm going to grab these here, and I'm going to pull them back and make them down, and I'm going to have a much more sloped leaf. So this is going to be a little bit more droopy. And we do have a bit of a bind here, so I may pull him back and down. So now we just have a different looking leaf. Go back to model mode, press R, copy, and rotate. So just constantly variation and differences in our leaves. Now this is definitely needing a lot more love, but I know it's probably boring watching me do this. So you guys get the idea. We want to go around, copy as many of these ferns as possible, and get as many different options for them. We are now to the point in the tutorial where we are ready to start talking about texturing. We're going to start talking about getting all this detail on for the textures for our leaves. So highly recommend sticking around for this part, because this definitely gets interesting. First up, let's convert our Cinema 4D material to an Octane material. And to do that, we need to start up Octanes. Let's just go to Octane and Octane Live Viewer. And now it's up. It might have took a few seconds for you because it's the first time booting up. It usually hangs for about a second. But now that we have this up, what we are going to do is select, I'm going to shrink this a little bit just so I can show you what's happening here. We're going to select this little cube here, this little bunch of dots, and we're going to drag this till it lines up right here on the right. Now you don't want the line going all the way down to the bottom. You want it just for this viewport. So it gets it till about here, let go, and now we have Octane docked is a side window. To begin, let's go ahead and go to Objects, HDRI Environment, select that, go into our image texture one level because we want to make sure we stick our HDRI in that image texture, and get an image texture however you would like. I have some preset HDRIs saved here in my folder, but feel free to get those however you would like to get them. And now we're just going to make a plane on the floor, press T, scale it up, and now press E to go back to move. And let's go ahead and click render and see what we have right here. And instantly, you're going to be like, oh, this looks horrible. And that's because this is on the fly converting Cinema 4D's material to an Octane material, and it is not doing a very good job. So what we need to do is we need to manually convert it. That's the key. That's the name of the game here. So we're going to stop Octane from rendering by clicking that there. We're going to select our material. We're going to go to Materials right up here, and we're going to click Convert Materials. Once we've done that, it's converted our Cinema 4D material to an Octane material and deleted it off of all of our ferns that had it applied and reapplied the Octane material. This is pretty crazy that it's done that. What's handy too is it remembered our UV mapping and all that stuff there, which is pretty handy. And because we converted our flat projection to a baked-in UV mapping new projection, it converted this over without a problem, and it's going over pretty easy. I'm actually going to select this leaf and rotate him up a little bit so he's not intersecting with his buddies right there. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I might pull him around. We might actually want to click point mode and just reshape points. I'm particular about this. Sorry guys, we're just going to turn that leaf a little bit. There we go. Just something a little bit nicer. Select this point, pull it over. There we go. Now we have a little bit kind of weird looking leaf there. That'll do the trick. It's a little interesting setup. But now that we have these leaves positioned, we need to start doing a little bit more texture editing. So what we need to do is, here's our Cinema 4D material. We can just delete him. We don't need him anymore. And let's go ahead and let's open up this Octane material. Let's dive into making this look actually pretty. Let's use the node editor. We're actually going to use that instead of this here because it's just so much easier to use the node editor. Now, I know the node editor can seem a little scary, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. It's going to be no problem. So the way I got into here is I just clicked this node editor button right here, and that'll open that up for us. That means we can take this material editor back here, and we can close him down and get rid of him. To begin, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take this whole node editor right here, and I think if I right-click and I click undock, that gives us this. That gives us a really weird effect. Let's close it. There's a way that we can go to node editor, close you. We can dock it up here into, oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. I need to go up here. I need to right-click, and I need to convert to tabs. And then I can take this, and I can, whoops. I need to right-click him and do convert to tab. And now I can take this entire tab and place it here, drop it on him right there. Now I can drop my node editor right here on top of that. So now I have like a tabbed interface. I'm just going to pull this all over. So now we have the same type of node editor, but just docked right over here. So now you guys kind of know what's going on a little bit. So now we have an easier way to kind of move around and work here. And we can go always back to our live view to reposition and get all that if we ever need. But here we go. In our node editor, we have these images that came over for us preset. We have our albedo map, and we have our alpha map, and they've already been plugged into opacity and diffuse for us because it was super smart. And if we go ahead and click render, we are going to have a plant that is not getting opacity. And the reason this is because Octane's doing a really good job, but it glitched out. It actually always bugs out on the opacity map. So what we have to do is delete it, and we have to open up our folder and drag in opacity right in here, release, drag it down here, plug it back in, and then it'll work. Don't ask me why. It's a little strange. But what we're going to do is we can do left alt, and we can actually pan around And we can take a look at our very pathetic looking fern. Hopefully yours is looking much nicer than mine because you put some time into it. But now we have something that's looking kind of decent right off the bat. But the real power of these maps is we can start adding a lot of detail to them. This will be a good enough angle right here. First off, let's change our render mode from direct lighting to path tracing. This is going to add some bounces and more samples, and this is going to look way more pretty. It's not a it's now an unbiased render instead of a biased average calculator compared to the direct lighting. I highly recommend path tracing. Let's click on our render settings and let's change a few things while we're in here just to make sure everything is looking pretty. First up, adaptive sampling. Let's turn that on. If you don't know what adaptive sampling is in Octane, I highly recommend you look it up. But basically what it does is it puts a limit on the noise ratio. If we get these new tabs down here when we turn on adaptive sampling, so we get main, this is our beauty render, and we get noise. And here, green is something that's in the acceptable range. It's actually what we determined. 0.03% noise is, or the size of the noise, determines whether it's acceptable or not with the renderer. I'm kind of getting off topic, but basically as it turns green, it stops rendering that part of the image. Pretty crazy. And the black areas is what it's still rendering. So it actually saves you render time by focusing only on the areas that are still noisy. So pretty handy. Recommend turning it on. We're going to click back to main. And now what we need to do is change our, everything's about good. We just need to go to our settings right here. Or, I'm sorry, not our settings. We want to go to our camera imager. And we're going to change our response all the way down to linear. And then we need to take our gamma and set that to 2.2. And now we're getting a correct flat image without all that extra color correction going on. Do not want that. We're also going to select natural response and definitely turn off vignetting by setting that to 0 and pressing enter. And now we go. There we go. Now we got all this set up. Now let's begin by actually making a pretty texture out of all this. Let's open up our material file explorer here, and let's grab our bump, drag that over, our displacement, our normal, our roughness, our specular, and a big one, translucency. We're going to be getting to him in a bit. Place him in there, select all this stuff, and I know we have a lot of image files and it's getting a little kind of confusing. Let's just pull these out of the way and we'll go through them individually one at a time. First up right here, let's pull this over a bit so we just have something to work through. We have our, I'm going to pull this over to kind of see the name. This is our displacement. So we're going to put our displacement here. This looks like our bump. Okay, so here's our bump. And here we have our roughness map. This should be roughness. Yep. Then we'll place our roughness there. To start, let's grab our normal map. That's this guy right here. And we're going to plug him into the normal slot. Let's move him so these aren't crossing here. So now that we have our normal on, that's going to add a little bit of detail to the surface. Next up is let's get our roughness, and that is our albedo I brought over. No, that's our translucency. Here is our roughness. We're going to take our roughness map. This should be the roughness. Oh, this is the specular. One thing I want to point out, notice how all these haven't rendered in. We're going to stop the Octane render. And when you stop the Octane render, it gives it time to process these images. So if you have the Octane render running and you're doing that, it won't actually update these. So that's kind of why we couldn't see anything. So I recommend doing that. But let's go ahead and take our roughness map. That's this guy down here, I believe. Roughness, yep. And we'll plug our roughness map into the roughness slot. Pretty straightforward. Pull him up here. We're going to take our displacement. We're going to save him for later. And this is our bump map, and we are not going to be using him now. Bump and normal cannot be used at the same time inside of Octane. It is kind of a bummer, but you just can't do it, sadly. So we're going to just save our bump over here on the left. But here is the real power, is this translucency map right here. And this only works for a diffuse material. So we're going to select our main material hierarchy here and go to basic, and then you can see we have material type is diffuse. This only works for a diffuse or a specular material. We can't use it on a glossy, so you're going to have to kind of mix those together. But I'll show you how to do that in a few seconds, so don't worry about that. I'll show you that process as well. But what we have to do is we're just going to click our little render send to scene here, just so we can see what happens. Let's take our translucency map and plug this into transmission. This is the key to realistic vegetation. When we plug this in, see here how we get all this extra lighting here on our plant? I'm going to unplug, gets much darker. I'm going to take this, I'm going to plug it back in transmission. See how we get all this light coming through on our geometry? This is a really, really big thing. This allows light to actually shine through our plant. Now this isn't fake luminance happening. Nope, this is actually true, real subsurface scattering shining through our plant that Octane's doing. This is just amazing. Like you'd have to use fake subsurface scattering inside of luminance or something in Cinema to pull this off, which I guess is not technically fake. It just doesn't do it as easily. Like this is just amazing. And what's so cool, and this is something that Cinema 4D does not do, I don't think, is this is based off of literally the light that's shining through, or if we pull this down to 0, we see nothing. And if we pull it up more, we get more and more light shining through our plant. So it is entirely dependent on the lights in your scene. We're just going to set this to 1, and there we go, we darkened it up. And while we're here, I want to point out, say we have some crazy value of 2.2 something. If I right click on these little 2 arrows, it will give you the average. It'll average it out to the whole number. It'll average it out to the nearest whole number. It won't actually revert it to the default, which should be 1. So I do want to point that out. Octane stuff inside Cinema behaves differently than the actual Cinema stuff, so it's interesting how it works. But now that we have this done, we are basically finished up for our diffuse matte editing. We have our normal set. What I like to do as a small kind of bonus is let's zoom in on this little leaf right here. Yeah, let's bring him down. Let's take the normals that we have right here, and we'll boost their power to, say, 2. Get a little bit more punch into that. I don't even know if that's affecting it. Let's punch this up to 8. Is it affecting it? It might be. We do have our roughness in. We're going to notice this more later on, so we'll leave this like, say, 1. And now let's start making a more pretty looking texture. But first things first is let's go up here and make a subdivision surface. I know we're jumping around a little bit. Sorry for this, guys. But let's take our whole fern and dump that into the subdivision surface. What this is going to do, let's go back to our view mode, is this is going to smooth out all the plants. We're not looking at such jagged edges. So this is really cool. We can easily and quickly smooth the whole thing out, make it real nice and pretty looking, and then de-smooth it out and shorten it later on if needed to have a little bit more power going on. Let's select this fern. We have to actually turn off our subdivision surface to let us select it and rotate and pull him down and go to point mode. Select these points, pull them up, and press R, rotate, and go in, grab these points, move them up, these points, pull them out, and these points, pull them. I'm feeling kind of like take them down a little bit. So just a lot of the same old, oops, we're not going to save. I did that out of habit. And turn this on. We have this kind of like leaf kind of sticking out there. But now that we have this set up, let's go ahead and get this material a little bit nicer. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to open up our material editor. Or, I'm sorry, we don't have to open the node editor that way because we have our node editor parked right up here. Let's hop back into there. And what we're going to do right now is we are going to make another material. Now, this is getting a little scary. We're getting into mixed materials, but don't worry. We're going to make it through this. We're going to talk you through the whole thing. We're going to make another Octane material. Just grab this little guy here, pull him in. Notice it made a new material down for us right there. So everything that's happening up here is happening down there. We're going to select this material, go to Basic, and change it from a diffuse to a glossy. Now what we're going to do is plug our diffuse color into the diffuse. So the same diffuse image that we had for our diffuse material is also going to our specular. And we're going to take our normal and plug that into our normal right here on that same material. And we're going to make sure that we have the opacity, and we plug that into the opacity on here as well. Now you'll notice we do not have a transmission slot, and that's because the specular materials do not have, or I'm sorry, the glossy materials do not have a transmission slot. The specular materials do, but we don't want this leaf to be transparent. We want to actually have it look solid with just a little bit of light shining through it, that very broken up diffuse light. So that's how you can kind of tell the difference. If we want this very clear and transparent looking, we would use a specular material. But since we still want to have a good, solid, firm-looking leaf that you can't truly see through, then we want to use a diffuse material with a transmission slot applied. But now that we have this done, we need to combine both of these. And the way we do that is create a mixed material. So we're just going to select this, drag it out here into the middle, and now you can see it made a new mixed material down here, and we're going to drag our Octane material to material 1, and our other Octane material, the diffuse one, into material slot 2. Now that we have this done, what we need to do is actually apply it to our leaves. So I'm going to go back to my main view here, and what we're going to do is we are going to take this mixed material, and this is what is super, super crazy. This is something that I really want to point out. If we wouldn't have taken all these materials and set the projection to flat and then bake that projection in by generating UVW coordinates for these guys like we did, which basically reconverted them back to UV mapping, but used that projection and properly placed our UVs in the correct area for each leaf. See how the leaf is in a perfect area, cropping out that positioning there. If we wouldn't have done that, we couldn't do what we're about to do right now. And that's take every material, holding down left shift and deleting it. And you're like, oh my goodness, we just lost all that. Nope, we're going to take all these objects, select them, select our material down here, our mixed one, right click and do apply. Now because we had the UV mapping for all of these set up off of that same exact mat, all these materials are running off of this same color mat here with all the leaves in the same material. And because we reposition their UV coordinates for each one, for example, here's a mid-sized leaf. The mid-sized leaf is positioned down in the bottom right, and if we have a big leaf, he's positioned in the top left. So every leaf is going to automatically take the new texture and already be mapped at the exact proper spot because we preset the UV coordinates for that. So huge, huge thing to do. Very handy to set that up like that. Now that we have this done, we can kind of see that we're getting some nice reflections on our leaves. We can kind of see that we're getting some kind of nice, if I can get a good angle. Here we go. We're now seeing reflections on our leaves. So we're getting kind of like some leaves that may be wet or something. So what we need to do is we also need to plug in our roughness right here. Take this roughness guy, take him, and plug him into the roughness slot. And this will add some roughness to our leaf. Now, what's very interesting with Octane in a roughness map is I find the gamma of 2.2 to be somewhat incorrect from how it's supposed to be inside Quixel or even Substance Painter if you use that. If you ever get a roughness map out of Substance Painter or Quixel, I find that a value of 1.25 gives something a little bit more realistic. Now, as we go down, we're getting less roughness, right? So we go down with our gamma, we get less, and as I go up, we're going to get more. So if I go to a gamma of 8, we're actually getting more roughness on our leaves. And I might have to hit render to actually see that applied. 0, render. Oh, I'm sorry, I was incorrect. The lower we go, the more rough it gets, and the higher we go, the less rough it gets. It's actually incorrectly updating, so I have to keep refreshing the renderer. This is a bug with the latest version of Octane. So I do recommend a value of 1.25. And instead of 2.2, and this will just add a little bit more punch, a little bit more roughness, and just kind of some more spread to the leaves. It looks much more realistic now. But now that we have that set up, what we also need to do is we need to go to our Octane mix material, and we need to set this amount slider. I'm going to grab a float right up here, drop him in, and plug him into the amount, select our float, and just give him the default value of 0.5 just to make sure that we always have 50-50. So half is the specular and half is the diffuse. Now, the reason I plugged in a float is just to make sure by default it's going to resort to a 50-50, but I just plugged this in ahead of time because I'm kind of paranoid and I just want to make absolutely sure that it is getting a true 50-50 because a lot of stuff is riding on that. So now that we have that done, because we cut our diffuse material in half, because we are half specular material now and half diffuse, what I want to do is I want to head down to our transmission texture here and double its power to say 2. This way we're getting the same amount of brightness that we had before when we had it sitting on 1 with only our diffuse texture on there. So we had to double his power to counteract the fact that we cut him in half in here on this mixed material. Now that we have this done though, this is basically your finished fern. Now, the only thing we want to finish now is select our specular material, go to our index, and adjust the Fresnel to something a little bit more realistic. I prefer a value of 1.45. This adds just a little bit more reflection for our fern here. Now, we also have the option to adjust the amount of, I'm going to do Control-Z to revert that camera move and find a good spot. I shouldn't probably be moving around the Octane viewport. I'm just going to go to View, grab this leaf, and position here a little bit quicker. And what I want to do is see the reflection we're getting off of this. Let's open up our, or we don't have to do that. I keep forgetting. We can just go to our node editor here. And what we're going to do is open up this folder, and we're going to grab our specular map, pull that in, and this is what we're going to apply to our specular channel. And this is going to greatly cut back our specular, like a lot. So I find for this, if we pull this back, at least I'm pretty sure that should add more specular. Yeah, so gamma of 0.1 will do that, and U at 8 will give us none. So we want this a lot less. So let's just say 1.25 again for our specular, similar to our roughness. You don't have to. And you just basically can adjust this to just how shiny you would like your leaf. This is at 0.1. See if that'll do it. Yep, 0.1 is way too much. So let's just say like 0.5 for our gamma. Resend that again. Not bad. Not too shabby. Let's go to our view. Let's get another leaf we could look at. Maybe this one right here. Yeah, he's getting a lot of shininess on him. And that's not too bad. We'll keep a shininess about that value. So I like to set my specular to like something like 0.5. Seemed to work pretty decent for me just to get enough. Maybe like 0.8 just to resend that. Just to get some decent. So here you go. This is basically the finished texture. Now the reason this doesn't look super great now is you need to have a lot of leaves and a lot of variation. You need to go through and copy a bunch of leaves, and I really encourage you to do so. So take like our mid leaf, go back to object mode, rotate, copy another leaf over here, and to pull him up, maybe pull him down, and then go back to point mode. Control A to select all of them, press T, scale them down so we get a little flatter. Scale them all down except for the middle guy here, so we'll turn him off, then press T and scale those down. Select these here, pull them up, and just get different leaves, different versions, different options. Maybe pull this up here, but pull that down here, and take these and kind of turn them around, and maybe pull this down and get like a better leaf shape out of them, and just make sure that they're different and they're not intersecting. So we'll just do something weird and pull him over like that. But a lot of options. You guys kind of get what I'm going for. Let's see what a finished one looks like. So I have a pre-prepped one, pre-baked one I'm pulling out of the oven, kind of like a cooking show. But what we're going to do is have it right here. I'm going to hop over to him. I'm going to grab this fern, Control C, and bring him back to our scene that we already have set up nice and pretty. Control V, and let's start taking a look at this guy. So let's hide him. Let's take a look at this fern. This is a fern that I spent a lot more time on, and I'm going to lift him up off the ground. And I'm going to hit render, and I want you to take a look at him and see what kind of, what goes into creating a more realistic looking one. First off, I actually, did I pre-generate UVW coordinates for him? I did. So we got some that overlap. I have different variations. So we can actually take his material, because I didn't actually make it as nice as the one we just built. I'm going to take this mixed material and stuff it on him instead. So they all line up nice and fancy. And what makes this one special, I think, if I set it up, yes I did, is on the base of all my ferns, I put flat little plates that run sideways, and these little flat plates have dead kind of ferns on them. Have like it's a bunch of flat dead ferns. See right here. And I've actually combined this to one entire polygon object. That's another step you can do. That once you have them all set, we can take all these ferns, middle mouse click on them, right click, and connect objects plus delete. I'm just going to do connect objects for this fern. So we have this new one, and I can unhide it. So now our entire fern right here, the one we just built, is a solid polygon object, and it's all baked into under one UV, which is pretty clean UVs we got set up for this guy. So that's the thing you can do. That's what I did. I don't recommend doing it all the time, but for this one I did. But on the map right here, I want to point out is I'm going to look at this opacity map. See up here in the top left, we have these little kind of dead looking things up here, and this specific one right here on the right. See how it's kind of just a bunch of series of little dead stuff? It's kind of piled around. That might be what at the bottom, it might be, sorry, I can talk, what might be at the bottom of the ferns. And you can see here we have like this kind of dead bunch of ferns that we can put on the bottom. This adds a lot more realism. So if I go to polygon mode, select that fern, select that one, do the shortcut UW, select connected, we can press T and scale him up. And we can rotate, make multiple copies, make different versions, and this is just kind of adding some kind of dead vegetation. Can't copy him because he's creating a new version. Can I copy? No, I can't. But you kind of see what I'm meaning. You want to do that before you bake this down into polyobject, but you add this at the bottom of your ferns to really kind of give some base to them and kind of like hide the connection where all these kind of come together. But now that we have all of these placed in, this is really the key. Now, again, variation is the name of the game, and the way we get that is we don't want just one type of fern bush. After you make your one bush, copy the bush and make another bush. Have a whole different pattern. Some of the bushes don't have these dead things at the bottom. That adds even more variation. Maybe some bushes will have some leaves, maybe some bushes won't. I encourage you to spend the time to set all of that up, and that is, I'm going to hop over here to our finished product, is how you can get a realistic looking field of fern. So here I have Octane Scatter copying 3 different fern bushes, 1, 2, and 3, and then some bushes here, which I can click here to show you the bushes, like that little piles of grass that we had in here. So that's what bushes are, these things. I'm referring to them as bushes. But once Octane loads it up, it does take some time because I have so many of them. We're rendering that full scale. We don't want that. But here we go. Here is my fern field using the technique that I just mentioned below now or previously. Now for these materials here, all these bushes, I used a much more bright specular. I actually entirely took off that specular map that I was mentioning before. I completely removed it for that fern because I didn't want them to have I didn't want them to be as, what's the word I'm looking for? Less specular. I wanted them to be more shiny. Didn't want them to be less diffuse. That's the word I'm looking for. So see how much water we're getting kind of like looking on these? I'm going to grab my render viewer. I'm just going to render. Here we go. We can see that they're very shiny, and we're getting a lot of reflection off of these to make them look like they're a little bit more wet. And the way we do that is I'm going to open up my fern material, or sorry, we're just going to go to our node editor. I still got it docked over here. And which one is it? It's this one right here. Yeah, this is the main fern. Now notice I didn't have a translucency map on these. I actually forgot to put it in. I didn't even know how to use it back then. So, hey, no time like the present. Put this one in here. Highly recommend doing so. And these materials aren't as nice as the one we just made. These are literally running off of a single specular material, so we can't even put translucency in unless we make a new material with that. But notice I'm not using a specular map, so I recommend going ahead and creating making a material like we just made previously. I highly recommend doing that. And if we hop back to our window mode, we can hop back up into our Untitled 3 scene. And I do highly recommend making this material like we did. This is much more realistic and give better results. Now, here is something that's pretty cool. Let's talk about tricks of the trade to add a little bit more detail and more variation into our scene once we got our multiple ferns done. Say we got both of these ferns. We got this fern 1, fern 1.1. We don't need this copy of you. We can rebring you back. We didn't need that. That was a pre-built one, the mushed up one we had. But say we got 2 different ferns, right? And we'll call this one fern 1. Call this one fern 2. What we can do is we can take this plane that we have sitting here. Oops, I middle mouse click. We want to go to Objects, Octane Scatter. And what we're going to scatter is both our ferns. We're going to drag them under there. We're going to take Octane Scatter, go to Distribution, and we're going to set the surface to the plane or that floor that we have. Now, we're currently set to vertex. Don't want that. I want to change this to surface, and I'll just randomly distribute it. And we can press render. And there we go. We have a massive amount of ferns cloned all over the surface. We have actually way too many. Instead of 1,000, let's do like 500. There we go. Something a little bit better. And I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick because my throat's getting dry. There we go. Much, much nicer. Now, notice that our ferns are clipping. I want to point out this is just some other tricks of the trade. This whole thing is just about all these different things. I know we're getting to a very long tutorial, guys. I appreciate we're at an hour right now. Thank you for hanging in. But first off, we don't want the ferns clipping into each other, so we want to set a keep away value. Let's try something like 50. This will keep them from intersecting, and it'll stop them from overlapping each other. We're still intersecting, so we need something longer than 50, maybe like a 450. 450 is too much. It's just about dialing in that number. 150. Okay, 150 is good. I go with 150. That's good enough for now. We could increase our amount to say 850. Maybe that would be better. There we go. 850 is nice. Change our keep away to 200. There we go. It's kind of keeping them. You want to increase that until you stop them from clipping into each other. But now that we've done this, what we need to do is we need to get some variation. So another way of getting realism and variation is adding some randomness to this. And to get some randomness in the position, we're going to go to MoGraph, Effectors, Random Effector. What's crazy is under Octane Scatter, we can apply our random effector to the effectors slot. And now we're having random positions. Let's go back to our random effector. We can actually apply Octane. We can actually apply effectors to Octane Scatter. It's pretty crazy. I'm going to move this over there to get some better view. And what we need to do is go to parameter, change it from position to rotation. And I forget which one it is. Let's try 80. I think it's height. What's this one? Pitch. Oh, pitch is not the one. Pitch is not the one. So you want to take your H value and set that to something like 360. So just full variation, 360 degrees of rotation for all our planes and all our shrubs here. And for some reason, those are being spawned off on the edge. When I re-render, I'm not really sure why they're kind of kicking off over there. It's very interesting. It could be part of the Octane Scatter's distribution, position, scale, rotation. Now, I want to point out these position, scale, and rotations are uniform. It rotates everything that same amount, so don't recommend using that if you want variation. But now, they're looking pretty good. I'm not sure why these guys are off on the edge. There's probably a reason, a setting or something I haven't checked. This is good enough for now. But once we got this done, basically now we just need the last little finishing touch. We have variation in our rotation. We have variation in our ferns. We have two types. Now all we need is to, and I'm going to turn off the fern I made. I just thought about that because I wanted to keep it fair to what we made in this tutorial, so I am going to take him out and hide him. I want it to be only the fern we just made, not the making it look extra pretty because I did some hidden work behind. I just wanted that as some reference, just so you guys would know. And that's pretty good. Here's our ferns. And now what we need to do is let's open up our mix material. Or I'm sorry, we can just click our node editor out of habit. And let's do one final thing. We have diffuse right here. We're going to take this diffuse material and we're going to run that into a mix. Run this into a mix material. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a gradient right here. And we are going to add some color to this. We're going to make one a little bit yellow, just like a little bit yellow, just something a little bit like this. And then the other end will have a little bit more green. And we'll make kind of a dark green, right? So we just have two colors, pretty distinct. And we're going to run this into this slot here. Now what we're going to do is put a random color in the back of this. See right here? And what this is going to do is we can then run this whole output into the diffuse for our specular. And see, we're getting some changes right there. And into the diffuse for our diffuse material. Whoops. Grab him, plug him in. There we go. Now this is pretty heavy. But what this is doing is basically what's happening is the random color right here is giving us a grayscale value, black and white. And we can better see this by me plugging this into the diffuse and into the diffuse on our specular. There we go. You can see we're getting a black and white value, perfectly black into perfectly white, and just fluctuating in between. And we're taking that black and white value and changing it to yellow and green through our gradient, and then we're mixing that with the image texture that we got for our albedo, our color on our leaf, and we're pumping that into our objects. And this is changing the color, black and white, or now yellow and green, based off of the objects. They're each object that is cloned inside of this instance, it only works on instance objects. I do want to point that out. Is the objects that we have cloned under Octane scatter are only this would only work with that because each object cloned gets its own number, kind of its own instance number, and it's changing its color based off of that, adding yet even more variation to our ferns. So it's all about changing that up. So there we go. Now this is way too much. So that's why we have this nice little amount slider. So let's grab our float texture, plug it in, and we are going to give it a value closer to 1, let's say like 0.8, to mix a little bit more biasly towards this texture, so we just have only slight variations, like maybe 0.1, or not 0.1, 0.9. If I set this all the way up to 1, we should lose. No, we're still getting it. Maybe I need to set it to like 5? This is very interesting. We shouldn't be getting any yellow. Mix texture 5. 10. This is very unique. They changed the functionality of a mixed texture by the looks of it. We're actually going in a negative value by typing higher than that. So, oh my gosh, I'm sorry guys. It was just a bug. It still functions like I thought it was. If we do 0, we are having pure effect from our gradient. We're losing a lot of realism in our plants because we lose that detail. But if we set this to like 0.9, then press render, we're getting slight, actually 0.8, maybe I'll allow a little bit more of that color. We're now getting a gradient between more yellow and more green looking plants. So we have some more dead looking ones and some more lively looking ones. And that adds yet even more variation into our ferns. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys found all of this helpful. Sorry this tutorial was so long. There's just so much stuff to talk about, so many different ways of adding variation. The topic of creating realistic plants is a very in-depth process, as you guys can tell now that you are now very aware of. And it's extremely powerful. And there's just so many things you have to do. There's no one thing you can do to make better plants. There's many things that we just covered in this. So to finish everything up, we just learned how to download Quixel Megascan plants. We learned how to apply them to a plane. We learned how to crop each leaf out individually. We then learned how to take those textures and convert them to a UV map texture for better editing later. We then learned how to place them in a null, rotate them around to create a basic fern shape. Then we learned how to take those basic shapes, clone, make more leaves. Then we learned how to deform the leaves and change them. Then we learned how to bring them into Octane. We learned how to change up their parameters. We learned how to add all our other maps, like our normal, our bump, our translucency, our albedo. And then after all that, we learned how to make a mixed material with our specular and mix them together. And then even with all of that done and all of that variation, we also learned that we need to create multiple copies of our ferns and have each fern a little bit different. And then even past all of that, we also learned to stick it into Octane scatter and add some random color with our random color node. So we just learned a whole ton of stuff in this tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If you did find it helpful, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't find it helpful, leave a thumbs down. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment in the comments section below. And before we end, I would like to point out, notice how each leaf is actually being randomized because each leaf under the fern is its own separate object. So each leaf is is considered its own separate instance. Where you're getting even more variation. Each bush has its own kind of levels of variation going on there, which I may change this back to 0.9. That's all up to personal taste though. And we'll click render again. And yeah, there we go. So we can get super massive. Each leaf is going to look different throughout this entire scene. So super big amounts of variation. Thanks again, guys, and I can't wait to see all of you in the next tutorial.